Hello dear viewers, today I as a story keeper will tell you a lot of good old fairy tales, a great reason to be nostalgic. Make yourself comfortable in a soft chair or bed, don't forget to subscribe to support the channel, and we start with the first story. Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Once upon a time, in a little cottage deep in the forest, there lived a family of 3 bears. There was Father Bear, who was big and gruff, Mother Bear, who was kind and gentle, and Baby Bear, who was small and sweet. One morning, Mother Bear made a pot of hot porridge for breakfast. But, as it was too hot to eat right away, they decided to go for a walk in the woods and let the porridge cool down. While they were out, a little girl named Goldilocks was wandering through the forest. She was a curious and adventurous little girl with golden hair that sparkled in the sunlight. As she was strolling through the woods, she came across the bear's cottage. The door was open, so, being as curious as she was, Goldilocks stepped inside without a second thought. The first thing she noticed was the porridge on the table. Now, Goldilocks was quite hungry from her walk, so she decided to try the porridge. She tasted Father Bear's porridge, but it was far too hot. Then she tried Mother Bear's porridge, but it was too cold. But when she tried Baby Bear's porridge, it was just right, so she ate it all up. Feeling a bit tired from her long walk, Goldilocks noticed 3 chairs in the living room. She sat in Father Bear's chair, but it was too hard. Then she sat in Mother Bear's chair, but it was too soft. Finally, she sat in Baby Bear's chair, and it was just right, until it broke under her weight and she fell to the floor with a thud. Now, feeling quite exhausted, Goldilocks decided to go upstairs to the bedroom. She saw 3 beds. The first one was Father Bear's bed, and it was too hard. The second bed was Mother Bear's, and it was too soft. But the third bed, Baby Bear's, was just right, so Goldilocks snuggled into it and fell fast asleep. Meanwhile, the 3 bears had returned home from their walk. When they walked into the cottage, they immediately noticed something was wrong. Father Bear growled, "Someone's been eating my porridge." Mother Bear said, "Someone's been eating my porridge too." And Baby Bear cried, "Someone's been eating my porridge and it's all gone." They walked into the living room. Father Bear said, "Someone's been sitting in my chair." Mother Bear said, "Someone's been sitting in my chair too." And Baby Bear said, "Someone's been sitting in my chair and it's broken." Then they climbed the stairs to the bedroom. Father Bear roared, "Someone's been lying in my bed." Mother Bear said, "Someone's been lying in my bed too." And Baby Bear said, "Someone's been lying in my bed, and she's still there." Goldilocks woke up with a start when she heard the bears. She was so startled that she jumped out of the bed and ran to the window. Without a second thought, she jumped out of the window and ran back to the safety of her own home, vowing never to go into another house without asking first. And from that day on, the 3 bears never left their door unlocked, and Goldilocks learned a valuable lesson about respecting other people's things. Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time, there was a sweet little girl who lived in a small village at the edge of a big, dark forest. Her mother loved her very much, and so did everyone in the village. She was known far and wide for the lovely red cloak she always wore, which her grandmother had made for her. And so, everyone called her Little Red Riding Hood. One day, her mother called her and said, "My dear, your grandmother is not feeling well. I've baked her some bread and made a pot of soup. Could you take these to her? She lives in the little cottage deep in the forest." Little Red Riding Hood was happy to help. Her mother reminded her to stay on the path and not to stray into the woods, where it was dark and mysterious. "Remember, dear," her mother said, "never talk to strangers and be careful on your way." With a basket of goodies in her hand, Little Red Riding Hood set off on her journey. The sun was shining brightly, and the birds were singing, but the forest was still a place of shadows and whispers. As she walked deeper into the woods, she met a sly and cunning wolf. He was big and gray, with sharp eyes and sharp teeth. "Where are you going, little girl?" the wolf asked, his voice smooth and friendly. Little Red Riding Hood, who was very polite, answered, "I'm going to my grandmother's house to bring her some bread and soup because she is not feeling well." The wolf thought for a moment. "Why don't you pick some flowers for your grandmother while you're on your way?" he suggested. "It would make her very happy." Little Red Riding Hood, always kind and eager to please, thought this was a wonderful idea. She stepped off the path to pick a bouquet of wildflowers, while the wolf slinked away, his eyes glinting with a wicked plan in his mind. The sly wolf raced through the forest, taking a shortcut to grandmother's house. When he arrived, he knocked on the door with his paw, imitating Little Red Riding Hood's sweet voice. "Grandmother, it's me, Little Red Riding Hood." "Come in, my dear," said the old grandmother, who was resting in her bed. But when the door creaked open, the wolf leapt inside, quickly gobbled up poor grandmother, and put on her nightgown and bonnet, hiding in her bed, waiting for Little Red Riding Hood to arrive. When Little Red Riding Hood finally reached her grandmother's cottage, she noticed something strange. The door was wide open, and the house seemed so quiet. She stepped inside and called out, "Grandmother, it's me. I've brought you some bread and soup." From the bed came a voice that sounded like her grandmother, but something about it didn't feel right. "Come closer, my dear," said the wolf, trying to disguise his voice. As Little Red Riding Hood approached the bed, she noticed how strange her grandmother looked. "Grandmother, what big eyes you have!" she exclaimed. "All the better to see you with, my dear," said the wolf with a grin. "And grandmother, what big ears you have!" Little Red Riding Hood said, feeling more and more uneasy. "All the better to hear you with, my dear," the wolf replied. "And grandmother, what big teeth you have!" Little Red Riding Hood said, stepping back in alarm. "All the better to eat you with, my dear," the wolf snarled, leaping out of the bed and lunging toward Little Red Riding Hood. But just at that moment, a huntsman, who was passing by the cottage, heard the noise and rushed in to help. He burst through the door, and with one mighty swing of his axe, he chased the wolf away, saving Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother. The huntsman found the grandmother, safe but frightened, hiding in a cupboard. Little Red Riding Hood was so relieved that she promised she would never stray off the path again or talk to strangers. From that day on, Little Red Riding Hood always remembered her mother's advice. And although the forest was a mysterious place, she no longer feared it, for she knew the importance of being careful and listening to the ones who loved her. Jack and the Beanstalk. Once upon a time, in a small village nestled at the foot of a great mountain, there lived a poor widow and her son Jack. They lived in a tiny cottage and had very little, but they were happy enough. Jack's mother worked hard every day, but no matter how much they tried, they never seemed to have enough food or money. One day, things got even worse. Their only cow, Bessie, had stopped giving milk, and they were left with no way to make a living. Jack's mother said to him, "Jack, we must sell Bessie at the market so we can buy some food. Take her there and sell her for a good price." So, Jack set off with the cow, walking through the forest to the market. But as he was walking along, he met an old man who had a glint in his eye. The man stopped Jack and said, "I see you're going to sell your cow, my boy. But tell me, would you like to make a fortune?" Jack was curious, of course, and asked, "How can I make a fortune?" The old man smiled and said, "I have some magic beans. They may look small, but if you plant them in the right place, they will grow into something extraordinary." He handed Jack a handful of beans in exchange for Bessie, and Jack, feeling excited about the idea of something magical, agreed to the trade. When Jack got home and showed his mother the beans, she was furious. "You foolish boy," she scolded. "You've traded our cow for a handful of beans. What good are they?" She tossed the beans out of the window in frustration and sent Jack to bed without supper. But that night, something strange happened. As Jack lay in bed, he heard a rustling sound outside. When he looked out the window, he saw something incredible. A gigantic beanstalk had grown from the beans his mother had thrown away. It stretched up and up, far into the sky, higher than any tree Jack had ever seen. Jack was filled with wonder and excitement. "I must climb it," he thought to himself. And so, the next morning, with great courage, he climbed the beanstalk. Higher and higher he went, past clouds and birds, until at last he reached the top. When Jack stepped onto the ground at the top of the beanstalk, he found himself in a strange and magical land. There in the distance was a giant castle. Jack, being both brave and curious, made his way toward it. As he entered the castle, he saw a giant woman who said, "What are you doing here, boy? You must leave at once. My husband, the giant, is coming home soon, and he eats little boys for breakfast." Jack didn't have much time to think, so he hid in a cupboard. Soon, the ground shook, and the giant entered the castle, grumbling and stomping. "Fee-fa-fo-fum," he bellowed. "I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive, or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." The giant's wife quickly served him his dinner, and after eating, the giant settled down to sleep, his loud snores echoing through the castle. Jack, being quick on his feet, crept out of his hiding place and noticed a golden harp and a bag of gold coins on the table. He grabbed the harp and the coins and hurried back toward the door, but just as he was about to leave, the giant stirred in his sleep and began to murmur, "Fee-fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman." Jack knew he had to run, so he grabbed the golden harp, and as quietly as he could, he dashed for the beanstalk. The giant awoke with a roar and started chasing after Jack, but Jack was faster. He climbed down the beanstalk as quickly as he could, the giant right behind him. When Jack reached the bottom, he called to his mother, who was waiting below. "Mother, hurry, get an axe." Jack's mother quickly handed him the axe, and with all his strength, Jack chopped down the beanstalk. The giant, still climbing down, tumbled all the way to the ground with a loud crash. And that was the last time anyone saw the giant. Jack and his mother were safe, and they lived happily ever after, rich from the gold and the magic harp Jack had brought home. As for Jack, he never forgot the lesson he learned, that courage and a little bit of adventure can change everything, even the most difficult circumstances. Hansel and Gretel. Once upon a time, in a small cottage at the edge of a dark, deep forest, there lived a poor woodcutter and his two children, Hansel and Gretel. The family was struggling, for they had very little to eat. Their mother was harsh and unkind, always worrying about their troubles, and their father, though a good man, couldn't provide enough for them. One day, the children overheard their parents talking. "We can't feed them anymore," the stepmother said. "We'll have to leave them in the forest. There's no other choice." The poor children were devastated, for they knew what this meant. But Hansel, being clever and brave, whispered to Gretel, "Don't worry, I'll think of something. We won't be lost forever." That night, as the family lay sleeping, Hansel quietly slipped out of bed and went to the window. He gathered as many small white pebbles as he could, filling his pockets. When the morning came, their parents took them into the woods, telling them that they would gather wood for the fire. But Hansel knew better. As they walked deeper into the forest, Hansel, without anyone noticing, dropped the pebbles along the path. They continued walking until, finally, their parents said, "Stay here and wait for us. We will return soon." But the parents never came back. Hansel and Gretel waited and waited, but the night was falling, and the forest grew darker and colder. However, Hansel had a plan. He led Gretel down the path, following the trail of pebbles that sparkled in the moonlight. Step by step, they found their way back home, where their father was overjoyed to see them. Their stepmother, however, was furious. Still, their joy was short-lived, for the wicked stepmother was determined to get rid of them. The next day, she took them back into the woods, and this time, Hansel's pockets were empty. He could find no pebbles to leave behind. As they walked through the forest, Hansel broke off pieces of bread and scattered them along the path, thinking they would help guide them home. But when they turned back to follow the crumbs, they found that the birds had eaten them all up, leaving them lost and alone. The night was dark and cold, and Hansel and Gretel wandered deeper into the forest. After what seemed like an endless journey, they came upon a house made of candy and cake. The windows were made of sugar, the walls were chocolate, and the roof was icing. The smell of sweet treats filled the air, and the children's hunger got the best of them. Without thinking, they began to nibble on the walls, enjoying the candy. But little did they know, the house belonged to a wicked old witch who lived alone in the forest. She had built the house to lure in children, and when she heard them nibbling on her house, she cackled with delight. "Who's there?" the old witch called out, her voice like a dry wind. She opened the door, and when she saw the two children, she smiled a cruel smile. My, what fine children you are," she said. "Come inside, and I'll give you something to eat." Hansel and Gretel, though wary, were too hungry to refuse. They stepped inside, and the witch locked the door behind them. She quickly fed them, but her plans were far darker. The wicked witch wanted to fatten Hansel up so she could eat him. She made him sleep in a cage and told Gretel to do all the housework. Every day, the witch would check on Hansel, holding out a bone for him to feel, asking him if he had grown fat enough. But clever Hansel tricked her, stretching out a chicken bone through the bars of the cage, pretending it was his finger. After days of this, the witch became impatient and decided that Hansel was fat enough. She ordered Gretel to start the oven, for she planned to cook Hansel and eat him that very day. But Gretel was smart. She pretended to be confused and said, "How do I get into the oven to check if it's hot enough?" The witch, eager to get her meal, showed her how. "Just like this, child," she said, opening the oven door wide. At that moment, Gretel shoved the witch into the oven, slamming the door shut. The wicked witch screamed and vanished into the flames. With the witch gone, Hansel and Gretel were free. They searched the house and found all sorts of treasures, gold and jewels that the witch had hoarded. They filled their pockets with as much as they could carry and made their way out of the forest. Eventually, they found their way back home, and their father, who had missed them dearly, welcomed them with open arms. Their stepmother was gone, and the children lived happily ever after, their troubles behind them, surrounded by love and warmth. The Three Little Pigs. Once upon a time, there were three little pigs who lived with their mother in a small house at the edge of the forest. As they grew older, it became time for each of them to leave home and build their own houses. The first little pig was the youngest and the laziest. He didn't want to work too hard, so he decided to build his house out of straw. "Straw is light and easy to work with," he thought. "I can finish it in no time and spend my days playing." The second little pig was a bit wiser than the first, but still quite eager to finish quickly. He chose to build his house out of sticks. "Sticks are stronger than straw," he reasoned, "and they'll make a good house without taking too much time to build." The third little pig, the oldest and most responsible of the three, worked long and hard. He decided to build his house out of bricks. "It will take longer," he said, "but a brick house will be strong and safe no matter what happens." Once the houses were built, the three little pigs went their separate ways to live on their own, proud of the homes they had created. But in the woods there was a big, bad wolf. And this wolf, with his sharp teeth and fierce hunger, had a very bad habit of eating little pigs. He had been watching the three little pigs and was very hungry. The wolf first came to the straw house of the first little pig. He knocked on the door and said, little pig, let me in." But the first little pig, who was inside his house, replied, "Not by the hair on my chinny chin chin, I won't let you in." The wolf snarled and said, "Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down." And that's exactly what he did. With a mighty puff, the straw house was blown away, and the little pig ran as fast as he could to his brother's stick house. Now, the wolf went to the second little pig's house, made of sticks. He knocked on the door and said, little pig, let me in." But the second little pig shouted, "Not by the hair on my chinny chin chin, I won't let you in." The wolf growled, "Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down." And with another great puff, the stick house was torn apart, and the two little pigs ran as fast as they could to their brother's brick house. Finally, the wolf came to the third little pig's house, made of strong bricks. He knocked on the door and said, little pig, let me in." But the third little pig, who was smart and knew the wolf's tricks, replied, "Not by the hair on my chinny chin chin, I won't let you in." The wolf, now furious, snarled, "Then I'll huff and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house down." He huffed and he puffed, but no matter how hard he tried, the brick house didn't move. The wolf huffed again and he puffed again, but the house stood firm, solid and strong. The wolf was exhausted and angry. He decided to climb onto the roof and go down the chimney to get into the house. But the clever little pig had a plan. He quickly started a fire in the fireplace and put a pot of boiling water on top. As the wolf climbed down the chimney, He fell straight into the boiling pot with a loud splash. He yelped in pain and scrambled out of the house, never to be seen again. The three little pigs were safe in their strong brick house, and they lived happily ever after. The first little pig learned a valuable lesson about the importance of hard work, and the second little pig understood that taking shortcuts could lead to trouble. The third little pig, who had built his house carefully and with patience, had saved the day. Cinderella. Once upon a time, there was a kind and gentle girl named Cinderella. She lived with her wicked stepmother and two cruel stepsisters, who treated her terribly. Every day, while her stepsisters sat by the fire and admired themselves, Cinderella was given all the hard work. She had to clean the house, cook, and do all the chores, often without a moment's rest. Her stepsisters were selfish and spoiled, and her stepmother, who was just as cruel, never showed any love or care for her. But Cinderella, despite all the mistreatment, remained kind-hearted and hopeful. She would often sit by the fireplace, singing softly to herself and dreaming of a better life. She believed that someday, things would change. One day, an invitation arrived for a grand ball at the royal palace. The king and queen were hosting it for their son, the prince, who was looking for a bride. The stepsisters were thrilled and immediately began preparing for the ball, thinking of nothing but their fine gowns and how to catch the prince's eye. Cinderella, as always, was left behind to clean up after them. But she dreamed of going to the ball, just like her stepsisters. She wished with all her heart that she could dance and be happy for just one night. When the day of the ball arrived, her stepsisters left for the palace, laughing and excited, while poor Cinderella was left at home, locked in her room. As she sat crying, suddenly a soft light filled the room. To her amazement, her fairy godmother appeared. She was a kind old woman with a warm smile and a wand that shimmered with magic. "Cinderella," the fairy godmother said gently, "why are you crying, my dear?" "I wish I could go to the ball," Cinderella answered, "but I have nothing to wear and no way to get there." The fairy godmother smiled. "You shall go to the ball, my dear, but first, you must listen to me. Go and get a pumpkin from the garden." Cinderella was surprised but obeyed. She quickly ran to the garden and picked a pumpkin, bringing it to the fairy godmother. With a wave of her wand, the fairy godmother turned the pumpkin into a grand carriage, shining with golden light. "Now," the fairy godmother continued, "go to the mice and rats in the house and bring them to me." Cinderella, still in awe, did as she was told. She brought the mice to the fairy godmother, who transformed them into fine horses to pull the carriage. She then turned the rats into coachmen, and the lizards into footmen. Finally, the fairy godmother turned Cinderella's rags into a magnificent gown, more beautiful than anything Cinderella had ever seen, sparkling with diamonds and silver. She even gave Cinderella a pair of glass slippers that shimmered like moonlight. "You shall go to the ball," the fairy godmother said, "but remember this, when the clock strikes midnight, all the magic will wear off. You must leave the palace before then." Cinderella, overjoyed, thanked the fairy godmother and climbed into the magical carriage. As she arrived at the ball, all eyes turned to her. The prince, who had been searching for someone special, was enchanted by her beauty and grace. He asked her to dance, and they twirled around the ballroom, their hearts growing fonder with each step. The stepsisters did not recognize Cinderella, for she looked so different in her gown, and they were too busy trying to catch the prince's attention. But Cinderella only had eyes for him, and the prince, likewise, could not take his eyes off her. As midnight approached, Cinderella remembered the fairy godmother's warning. She hurriedly left the palace, running down the stairs of the castle. In her rush, she lost one of her glass slippers on the steps. The prince, who had been following her, found the slipper and realized that the beautiful girl he had danced with was the one he had been waiting for. The next day, the prince sent his servants to search the kingdom for the owner of the glass slipper. They visited every house, trying the slipper on every girl. When they arrived at Cinderella's house, her stepsisters tried the slipper on, but it was too small for them. Finally, Cinderella tried on the slipper, and it fit perfectly. The prince knew at once that she was the one. He took Cinderella to the palace, where they were married in a grand ceremony. Cinderella was finally free of her wicked stepmother and stepsisters, who were left to live out their lives in bitterness and jealousy. Cinderella and the prince lived happily ever after. She was no longer the girl who worked in the shadows. She was a princess, loved and cherished by all. Sleeping Beauty. Once upon a time, in a beautiful kingdom, there lived a king and queen who longed for a child. For many years, they had no children, and they wished with all their hearts for a little one to love. Finally, after many years of waiting, the queen gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. The king and queen were overjoyed and threw a grand celebration in honor of their daughter's birth. They invited all the fairies in the kingdom to come to the celebration, so that each fairy could bestow a special gift upon the newborn princess. The king and queen welcomed the fairies to the castle with open arms, but they accidentally forgot to invite one fairy, an old and wicked fairy who lived deep in the forest, far from the kingdom. This fairy was known for her dark magic, and she was not pleased to have been left out of the festivities. The fairies arrived one by one, and each fairy gave the princess a wonderful gift. One fairy gave her beauty beyond compare, another gave her the gift of grace, and yet another gave her kindness. The gifts kept coming, making the princess more and more perfect in every way. But then, the wicked fairy appeared at the celebration, uninvited and angry. She stepped forward and said in a cold voice, "Since I was not invited to the celebration, I shall bestow my own gift upon this child." The room grew still, and all the fairies stepped back in fear. The wicked fairy raised her hands and cursed the princess with a terrible spell. When the princess turned 16, she proclaimed, "She shall prick her finger on the spindle of a spinning wheel and die." A chill ran through the room, and the guests gasped in horror. The king and queen were heartbroken, but before they could speak, a kind fairy who had not yet given her gift stepped forward. She had no power to undo the wicked fairy's curse, but she could soften it. "You shall not die," the kind fairy said, "but on your 16th birthday, you will prick your finger on the spindle of a spinning wheel. However, instead of dying, you will fall into a deep, deep sleep, from which you will never awaken, unless you are kissed by your true love." The wicked fairy vanished with a dark laugh, leaving the castle filled with sorrow. The king and queen, desperate to protect their daughter, ordered that all spinning wheels in the kingdom be destroyed. They locked the princess away in the most secure room in the castle, hoping to keep her safe from the curse. As the years passed, the princess grew into a beautiful young woman, full of kindness and grace, just as the fairies had promised. But on the day of her 16th birthday, the curse was about to unfold. On that day, while exploring the castle, the princess wandered into an old tower that she had never seen before. There, hidden away, she found a spinning wheel. Intrigued, she reached out to touch it. The moment her finger touched the spindle, she pricked it, and the curse took hold. Immediately, the princess fell into a deep, enchanted sleep. The fairy who had softened the curse appeared once again. "Do not fear," she said. "Though the princess sleeps, her sleep will not be eternal. One day, a prince will come who will awaken her with a kiss." The entire kingdom was plunged into sorrow, and the king and queen were heartbroken. But the kind fairy had one more piece of magic to offer. She cast a spell over the entire kingdom so that everyone, every animal, every tree, every stone, fell into a deep sleep alongside the princess. The kingdom lay in silence, waiting for the day that the princess would be awakened. Years passed, and the castle grew overgrown with vines and thorns. The story of the sleeping princess became a legend, and many brave knights and princes tried to reach the castle to wake the princess. But the thorns and brambles were so thick that none could get through. Then, one day, a handsome young prince heard the tale of the beautiful princess who slept in the castle, waiting to be awakened by true love's kiss. He was determined to find her and break the curse. He traveled across the land, through forests and mountains, until he finally came upon the enchanted castle, where the thorns and vines seemed to open up for him, guiding him inside. The prince made his way through the castle, and there, in the highest tower, he found the princess, lying peacefully on a bed, as beautiful as ever. With a gentle heart and a soft smile, the prince leaned over and kissed her on the lips. The moment his lips touched hers, the magic of the curse was broken. The princess's eyes fluttered open, and she smiled, for she had been awakened by true love's kiss. As the princess awoke, so did the entire kingdom. The trees, the animals, and the people all stirred from their long slumber, and the castle was filled with joy once more. The prince and princess fell deeply in love, and soon they were married in a grand ceremony. The kingdom rejoiced, and the princess and the prince ruled with kindness and wisdom. And so, the beautiful princess who had once been cursed to sleep forever was awakened by love, and she and her prince lived happily ever after, bringing peace and happiness to the kingdom for many years. The Ugly Duckling. Once upon a time, in a cozy little barnyard, a mother duck sat on her nest, keeping her eggs warm under her wings. One day, after what seemed like an eternity of waiting, the eggs began to crack. One by one, little ducklings hatched, peeping and waddling around the nest. Each of them was a perfect little yellow fluff ball, just like their mother. But there was one egg that took longer than the others to hatch. It was much larger, and when it finally cracked open, out came a little duckling that looked very different from the others. The mother duck looked at her new baby and frowned. This little one was not yellow and fluffy like the others. It was gray, and its feathers looked scruffy and rough. "Oh dear," she thought. "This duckling looks quite different." The other ducklings were not kind to their new sibling. They stared at him and laughed. "Look at that ugly duckling," they teased. "You don't look like us at all. You're too big and your feathers are all wrong. You don't belong here." The poor duckling tried his best to fit in, but no matter how hard he tried, the other animals at the barnyard would make fun of him. The chickens called him awkward, and the geese laughed at his appearance. Even the animals that were kind to him didn't want to play with him because he was different. Feeling deeply ashamed of his looks, the ugly duckling decided that he didn't belong in the barnyard, so he ran away. He wandered across fields and through forests, feeling more and more lonely with every step. The other animals he met along the way only made him feel worse, for they, too, rejected him. He spent the long, cold winter alone in a damp little hut, feeling miserable and abandoned. As the days grew warmer and spring began to bloom, the ugly duckling found himself near a beautiful lake. He gazed at the water and saw his reflection in the shimmering surface. For the first time, he noticed something remarkable. His body had changed. He was no longer the clumsy, awkward creature he had once been. His gray feathers had turned to smooth, gleaming white, and his wings had grown strong and elegant. It wasn't until the ugly duckling looked up and saw a group of swans gliding across the lake that he realized what had happened. He was no longer the ugly duckling at all. He was a swan, graceful, beautiful, and proud. The swans gathered around him and welcomed him with open wings. He had finally found his true family. The once ugly duckling was no longer mocked or laughed at. Instead, he was admired for his elegance and beauty. The other animals that had once rejected him now looked on in awe. They realized that they had been wrong to judge him by his appearance. The swan, who had once been the ugly duckling, was now the most beautiful bird on the lake. The moral of the story was clear. What we see on the outside does not define us. Beauty isn't always obvious at first, and sometimes it takes time for us to grow into who we are meant to be. Just like the ugly duckling, we may feel out of place or misunderstood, but with time and patience, we can discover our own inner beauty and find our place in the world. The Gingerbread Man. Once upon a time, there was an old woman and her husband who lived in a cozy little cottage. They had no children, and often the old woman would feel lonely. One day, she decided to bake a gingerbread man, just for fun. She mixed the dough carefully, rolled it out, and shaped it into a little man with frosting for eyes, a mouth, and buttons. After placing him on the baking tray, she popped him into the oven. As the gingerbread man baked, something magical happened. When the old woman opened the oven to take him out, the gingerbread man suddenly sprang to life. He jumped off the tray and shouted, "Run, run as fast as you can. You can't catch me, I'm the gingerbread man." The old woman was shocked, and she chased after him, but the gingerbread man was too fast. He dashed out the door and into the yard, with the old woman calling out behind him, "Stop, stop, Come back here." The gingerbread man laughed and continued running, faster and faster, taunting, "Run, run as fast as you can. You can't catch me, I'm the gingerbread man." As he raced down the road, he came across a pig. The pig, hungry and curious, said, "I smell something delicious. Stop right there." But the gingerbread man just laughed and shouted, "Run, run as fast as you can. You can't catch me, I'm the gingerbread man." And with that he ran even faster, leaving the pig behind. Next, the gingerbread man came across a cow who was also hungry. "I smell something tasty," the cow said. "Stop right there." But the gingerbread man didn't stop. He laughed and taunted, "Run, run as fast as you can. You can't catch me, I'm the gingerbread man." And off he went, leaving the cow in the dust. The gingerbread man continued running over fields, through forests, and down the road as fast as he could go. As he ran, he passed a horse, and the horse, seeing the gingerbread man speeding by, shouted, "I'll catch you." But the gingerbread man, laughing all the way, cried out, "Run, run as fast as you can. You can't catch me, I'm the gingerbread man." Just when it seemed like no one could catch him, the gingerbread man came upon a sly fox sitting near the riverbank. The fox, who was very clever, saw an opportunity. He spoke in a soft, smooth voice, "Oh, gingerbread man, you're so fast, but I'm sure you must be tired from all that running. Why don't you climb onto my back, and I'll help you across the river." The gingerbread man, who had never met such a friendly fox before, thought for a moment. He had been running for so long and was starting to get a little weary. "That sounds good," he said, "but I'm afraid you might eat me when I get on your back." "Oh no, dear gingerbread man," the fox replied with a sly smile. "I would never eat you. Trust me, I am your friend. I'll just carry you across the river safely." The gingerbread man, still not suspecting anything, decided to climb onto the fox's back. The fox waded into the river with the gingerbread man perched safely on his back. As they crossed the river, the fox began to speak again. "You know, I'm getting a little tired carrying you. Maybe you should climb up on my nose to rest." The gingerbread man, thinking the fox was just trying to be helpful, agreed and climbed up onto the fox's nose. But just as the fox reached the other side of the river, he gave a quick shake of his head, and before the gingerbread man knew it, the fox opened his mouth wide and snapped the gingerbread cookie up in one quick bite. The gingerbread man was gone in an instant, and though he had run so fast and tricked so many, the clever fox had outsmarted him in the end. The Princess and the Pea. Once upon a time, in a beautiful kingdom, there was a prince who was looking for a princess to marry. He wanted a true princess, one who was not only kind and graceful but also worthy of being his queen. So, he traveled far and wide, visiting many kingdoms and meeting many beautiful ladies. But no matter how many princesses he met, he could never quite be sure if any of them were truly real princesses. One stormy night, as the prince was feeling disheartened and returned to his castle, a knock came at the door. A young woman stood outside, soaked by the rain, her hair and clothes wet from the storm. She looked like she had traveled for miles. She told the guards that she was a princess, but no one believed her, for she did not look like a princess who had just come from a royal court. She explained that she had wandered through the storm, searching for shelter, and had nowhere to go. So, the guards brought her inside to the castle and told the queen, the prince's mother, that a young lady had arrived, claiming to be a princess. The queen was curious but also a little skeptical. She decided that she would put the girl to the test to see if she truly was a princess. The queen went to the guest room, where the young woman was to sleep, and placed a tiny, delicate pea at the bottom of the bed. She then stacked 20 mattresses on top of the pea, creating a towering pile of softness. Finally, she placed 20 feather beds on top of the mattresses. The bed looked so comfortable and inviting, and the girl would surely sleep soundly, the queen thought. But the queen had a plan. When the princess-to-be lay down on the bed, she had no idea that the pea was hidden under all those layers of mattresses. The young woman fell asleep, but the queen knew that by morning she would find out if this girl was truly a princess. The next morning, when the girl came down to breakfast, the queen asked her how she had slept. "Oh, it was dreadful," the girl replied. "I hardly slept at all. I could feel something hard pressing into my back all night, and it kept me awake. I tossed and turned, trying to get comfortable, but no matter what I did, I couldn't sleep. I feel so bruised this morning." The queen smiled to herself, and with a look of satisfaction, she turned to the prince and said, "This is truly a princess. Only a real princess would be so sensitive that she could feel a pea under all those mattresses and bedding." The prince, who had been listening to the girl's words, was overjoyed. He knew that this was the woman he had been searching for. She was delicate, and her sensitivity showed her true nature. So, the prince and the girl were married, and they lived happily ever after, ruling the kingdom with kindness and wisdom. And as for the pea, well, it was kept in a special little box as a reminder of the night that the true princess was tested and her royal nature was proven. Rapunzel. Once upon a time, in a distant land, there lived a kind and good couple who had long wished for a child. One day, the woman became pregnant, and as her pregnancy progressed, she developed a craving for a special plant called Rapunzel that grew in the garden of their neighbor, an old witch. The plant was beautiful and delicious, and the woman longed for it more than anything. Her husband, desperate to please his wife, went to the witch's garden one evening to pick some of the Rapunzel for her. But as he reached down to pluck the plant, the witch appeared out of nowhere, her eyes glowing with anger. "How dare you steal my Rapunzel?" she cried. "You will pay for this." The man begged the witch for mercy, explaining that his wife had been craving the plant, and she would be in great distress without it. The witch, seeing the man's sincerity, decided to make a deal. "You may take all the Rapunzel you want," she said, "but in return, you must give me the child your wife bears." The man, terrified and ashamed, agreed to the witch's deal, and when the baby was born, the witch came to claim the child. The baby girl was named Rapunzel, and the witch took her away, keeping her locked in a high tower deep in the forest, where no one could find her. The tower was surrounded by thick trees, and there was no door, only a single window at the very top. The witch raised Rapunzel in isolation, keeping her hidden from the world. As Rapunzel grew, her golden hair grew longer and longer, until it became as long as the tower itself, shining like strands of sunlight. The witch would visit Rapunzel every day, calling to her, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." And Rapunzel, who had no other way of knowing the world outside, would lower her long hair down through the window so the witch could climb up into the tower. Years passed, and Rapunzel grew into a beautiful, kind young woman, though she had never seen another person except for the witch. One day, a prince happened to be riding through the forest, and he heard Rapunzel singing her lovely songs from the tower. The prince, enchanted by her voice, decided to find out where the sound was coming from. He followed the music until he found the tower. He saw the witch call to Rapunzel and climb up her long golden hair, and the prince realized that this was no ordinary girl. This was someone trapped in a tower, just like a prisoner. The next day, the prince returned and called out to Rapunzel in the same way, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." And to his delight, Rapunzel, not knowing who he was, let her hair down, and the prince climbed up into the tower. When they met, Rapunzel was surprised to see someone so kind and handsome. She had never seen a man before, and she felt an immediate connection with the prince. They talked and shared stories, and Rapunzel told him of the witch who had kept her locked in the tower all her life. The prince promised to come back every day to visit her, and they began to meet secretly. But the witch soon discovered their secret. One day, when Rapunzel let down her hair for the prince, the witch noticed that it was heavier than usual. She climbed up quickly, and when she reached the top, she found Rapunzel and the prince in a joyful embrace. In a fit of rage, the witch took Rapunzel and cut off her golden hair, throwing her out into the wilderness. She then waited for the prince to return, and when he did, she tricked him into climbing up the tower using Rapunzel's shorn hair. But when the prince reached the top, he found only the witch, who pushed him from the tower. He fell into a thorny bush, and though he was hurt, he managed to escape into the forest, blinded by the fall. For many years, the prince wandered through the forest, searching for Rapunzel, but he could not find her. Meanwhile, Rapunzel, who had been wandering the wilderness, also grew up and learned to survive. She found a place to live and even gave birth to twins, unaware that the prince was still searching for her. One day, as fate would have it, the prince was wandering through the forest again when he heard Rapunzel's beautiful voice singing in the distance. He followed the sound and finally found her, though he was still blind. When Rapunzel saw him, she cried out with joy, and her tears fell on his eyes. Miraculously, the prince regained his sight. Overjoyed, the prince and Rapunzel were reunited. They returned to the kingdom, where they were married in a grand ceremony. Rapunzel's long golden hair, which had once been cut off by the wicked witch, grew back again, even more beautiful than before. Together, the prince and Rapunzel ruled the kingdom, and they lived happily ever after with their children, free from the witch's evil spell. Beauty and the Beast. Once upon a time, there was a wealthy merchant who had 3 daughters. The 2 older daughters were vain and selfish, always concerned with outward appearances and material things. But the youngest daughter, whom everyone called Beauty, was kind-hearted, gentle, and loved by all. She was beautiful, not only in face but in spirit, and she would often be found reading books or helping others in need. One day, the merchant received news that one of his ships had returned from a faraway land, and he was excited to bring back gifts for his daughters. But when he reached the port, he discovered that the ship had been lost in a storm, and all his wealth was gone. With his fortune lost, the merchant and his daughters had to move to a small cottage in the countryside, where they lived a modest life. Though her life had changed, Beauty remained cheerful and kind, never complaining, and always doing her best to help her father and sisters. One winter day, the merchant was on a journey to buy goods, and as he was returning home, he became lost in a dark and snowy forest. After wandering for hours, he saw a magnificent castle in the distance. Thinking he might find shelter there, he approached the castle and knocked on the door. The door opened on its own, and the merchant stepped inside. He found the castle grand but empty, and there was no one in sight. He decided to explore and soon found a beautiful table full of food. Hungry from his long journey, he ate the food and enjoyed the warmth of the fire, but when he tried to leave, he realized that the door had closed behind him, trapping him inside. Suddenly, a frightening voice echoed through the castle. It was the voice of a terrifying creature, the Beast, who appeared before the merchant. The Beast was enormous, with a terrifying face and sharp claws, but his eyes were filled with sadness and longing. "You have stolen my food," the Beast growled. "For this, you must pay the price. You will remain here as my prisoner." The merchant begged for mercy, explaining that he had not intended to steal anything and that he had only sought shelter in the castle. The Beast, after hearing the merchant's plea, agreed to release him, but with a condition. "You may leave," said the Beast, "but you must promise that you will send one of your daughters to take your place. If none of your daughters agrees, you will return and you will stay forever." The merchant was horrified, but he promised to return with his daughter. With a heavy heart, he made his way back home. When the merchant returned to his cottage, he told his daughters what had happened. The 2 older daughters were terrified, but Beauty, though sad, stepped forward. "Father, I will go. I cannot let you suffer for me. I will go to the Beast's castle in your place." The merchant was reluctant, but Beauty insisted, and so she left for the castle, bidding farewell to her family. When she arrived at the castle, the Beast welcomed her with a strange, but kind, hospitality. Though she was frightened by his appearance, Beauty tried to be brave, and the Beast gave her a beautiful room, food, and comfort. Every evening, the Beast would ask her the same question, "Beauty, will you marry me?" And every evening, Beauty would reply, "No, I cannot marry you, for you are a beast." Despite his appearance, the Beast never grew angry or upset. He simply left her to enjoy her time in the castle, and he continued to treat her kindly. As the days went by, Beauty found herself growing fond of the Beast. She began to see past his frightening appearance and started to notice his gentleness, his kindness, and the sadness in his eyes. One day, the Beast gave Beauty a magic mirror that allowed her to see her family, and she used it to watch over her father and sisters. One day, Beauty asked the Beast if she could visit her family. The Beast was saddened by the request but agreed, giving Beauty permission to go for a short time. Before she left, he warned her, "Remember, Beauty, you must return to me by the end of the week. If you do not, I will die of sorrow." Beauty promised she would return, and after a tearful farewell, she went to visit her family. When she arrived, her father and sisters were overjoyed to see her, but they quickly became jealous of the Beast's kindness toward her. Her sisters persuaded her to stay a little longer, telling her that the Beast would never know, but as the days passed, Beauty began to feel more and more guilty. One evening, after a dream in which she saw the Beast lying in the garden, nearly dead from sadness, Beauty realized how much she cared for him. She rushed back to the castle, but when she arrived, she found the Beast lying on the ground, weak and heartbroken. She cried, "Oh Beast, I love you. I will marry you." At her words, something magical happened. The Beast began to change. His body transformed, his terrifying appearance faded, and in his place stood a handsome young prince. He was no longer a beast, but a kind and noble prince, who had been cursed by a wicked sorceress long ago. The prince explained that only true love could break the curse, and Beauty's love for him had freed him. The curse had been lifted, and the prince was free at last. The two of them were overjoyed and soon fell in love. Beauty and the Beast were married in a grand ceremony, and they lived happily ever after, ruling the kingdom with wisdom and kindness. The Beast, now a prince, was loved by all, and Beauty's heart was full of love for the man who had once been a beast, for she had seen the true beauty inside him. The Frog Prince. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful princess who lived in a grand castle surrounded by lush gardens and flowing streams. She was kind and gentle, but she had one little flaw. She was a bit careless with her belongings. One day, while playing near a sparkling pond, the princess dropped her golden ball into the water. The ball was her favorite toy, and she couldn't bear to lose it. She knelt down by the edge of the pond, but the ball had sunk too deep for her to reach. She sat by the pond and began to cry, feeling helpless and sad. "Oh, my beautiful ball! How could I have lost you?" she sobbed, her tears falling into the water. Just then, to her surprise, a voice called out from the pond. "Why are you crying, princess?" The princess looked around in confusion, but she could see no one. Finally, she looked down into the water and saw a large frog sitting on a lily pad. The frog blinked up at her, his eyes round and wise. "I will help you get your ball," the frog said, "but in return, you must promise me something." The princess, desperate to retrieve her golden ball, agreed quickly. "Oh, kind frog, I promise I will do anything to get my ball back. Please help me." The frog smiled, showing his small, green teeth. "You must promise that you will take me with you to your castle, allow me to sit at your table, and let me sleep on your pillow by your side." The princess wrinkled her nose, repulsed at the thought of such a strange request. But the frog, with his wise eyes, seemed to be sincere. Still, she was so desperate for her ball that she promised him anything, anything at all. With that, the frog hopped into the water, and in a moment he emerged holding the golden ball in his mouth. He gently placed it at the princess's feet, and she gasped with joy. "Oh, thank you, kind frog," she exclaimed. "I will keep my promise, I swear it." But as soon as the frog had helped her, the princess, without a second thought, scooped up her golden ball and hurried back to the castle, leaving the frog behind in the pond. She had forgotten all about her promise, caught up in her happiness. That evening, as the princess sat down to supper in the castle, she heard a familiar voice calling from the door. Prince, are you going to keep your promise?" The princess froze. She looked up and saw the frog standing at the door of the grand hall. He had hopped all the way from the pond to the castle. The princess blushed, embarrassed that she had forgotten. She sighed and said, "Oh, I did promise you, didn't I? Very well, come in." The frog hopped into the room and sat down at her table. He ate from her plate, and when dinner was finished, he followed her up the stairs. She reluctantly let him sleep beside her on the pillow, though it made her feel uncomfortable. The next morning, something very unexpected happened. As the sun's rays streamed through the window, a magical change occurred. The frog began to transform before her eyes. Slowly, he grew taller and taller, his green skin turning into soft, human skin. The princess gasped in awe as the frog turned into a handsome young prince, dressed in fine clothes. The prince smiled at her and said, "I am not really a frog, princess. I was cursed by a wicked sorceress, and only the promise of a kind princess could break the spell. You, princess, were the one to free me from my curse." The princess, who had grown fond of the frog despite his strange appearance, realized that she had indeed broken the curse with her kindness and her promise. The prince took her hand gently and said, "Now, I am free, thanks to you, and I can finally be the man I was always meant to be." Overjoyed, the princess and the prince returned to the castle, where they were married in a grand ceremony. They lived happily ever after, ruling the kingdom with wisdom and kindness. The princess learned that keeping promises, no matter how difficult, was a very important part of life. And the prince, now in his true form, was grateful to the princess for breaking the curse with her kindness and honesty. The Elves and the Shoemaker. Once upon a time, there was a poor shoemaker who lived with his wife in a small, humble cottage. Despite his skill in making shoes, he struggled to make enough money to feed himself and his wife. Every day, he would work diligently at his little workshop, but no matter how hard he tried, there never seemed to be enough income to live comfortably. The shoemaker was a kind man, and even though life was difficult, he never lost hope. One evening, as the shoemaker sat at his workbench, looking at the leather scraps and the shoes he had yet to finish, he sighed deeply. "I don't know how we will get by, my dear," he said to his wife, "but I will try to finish this last pair of shoes before bed." The shoemaker worked late into the night, crafting the shoes as best as he could. As he was about to finish, he could no longer keep his eyes open. He was so tired that he decided to leave the shoes unfinished and get some rest. With a weary sigh, he went to bed and fell asleep. The next morning, when the shoemaker awoke, he was surprised to find that the shoes he had left unfinished were now completed. They were beautifully made, perfect in every way. His wife, just as astonished, looked at the shoes with wide eyes. Who could have done this? She wondered. Just as the shoemaker was marveling at the shoes, a customer came into the shop. "I saw the shoes you made yesterday," the customer said, "and they are exactly what I needed. I'll pay you a good price for them." The shoemaker was overjoyed. He was able to sell the shoes for more money than he had ever imagined, and with this new wealth, he bought more leather to make more shoes. But as the day wore on, he still wondered who had helped him by finishing the shoes overnight. That evening, the shoemaker decided to stay awake and see if he could figure out who had been working while he slept. He and his wife sat quietly in the workshop, hiding behind a curtain, watching. As midnight struck, something magical happened. To their amazement, two tiny elves appeared, wearing little clothes made of leaves and twigs. They hopped onto the workbench and began to work at lightning speed. With tiny hands, they stitched and shaped the leather, creating beautiful shoes in no time at all. The shoemaker and his wife watched in wonder as the elves worked, their tiny fingers moving so fast that it seemed like magic. They could hardly believe their eyes. The elves worked tirelessly, making several pairs of shoes. Then, before the shoemaker and his wife could say a word, the little elves disappeared into the night, leaving the shoes behind. The next morning, when the shoemaker opened his shop, he found the most marvelous shoes waiting for him, perfect and finished. As before, customers came and bought the shoes for far more than he expected. With this newfound wealth, the shoemaker could finally live comfortably, and he was able to buy more materials for new shoes. But the shoemaker and his wife were deeply moved by the kindness of the elves. They wanted to show their gratitude for the elves' generosity. So, the shoemaker and his wife decided to make the elves a special gift. They worked together, crafting the finest clothes they could, sewing little shirts and pants, tiny jackets, and even shoes. That night, when the elves came to work, the shoemaker and his wife placed the tiny clothes on the workbench for the elves to find. They hid once again, watching in silence. When the elves appeared, they were thrilled to see the gifts. They clapped their tiny hands with joy, and without saying a word, they tried on the clothes. The elves were so pleased that they danced and sang, their joy filling the room. Then, with a grateful smile, they took the clothes and vanished into the night. From that night on, the elves never returned to the shoemaker's shop. The shoemaker and his wife, however, were not sad. They knew that they had given the elves what they needed, and the elves had repaid them with their kindness. The shoemaker's business continued to thrive, and he and his wife lived happily, never forgetting the kindness of the little elves who had helped them when they were in need. As we come to the end of our journey through these timeless fairy tales, I hope you've enjoyed each story and the valuable lessons they bring. Whether it's the courage of Little Red Riding Hood, the wisdom of the tortoise and the hare, or the kindness of the lion and the mouse, each tale offers a gentle reminder of the power of love, honesty, and doing what's right. These stories teach us about the importance of kindness, the consequences of vanity, and the value of hard work and patience. They remind us that no matter how small we are or how difficult life seems, kindness and perseverance will lead us to success. Whether it's trusting others, believing in ourselves, or simply treating others with respect, each fairy tale leaves us with something to think about as we face our own challenges in the real world. Fairy tales, with their magic, wonder, and morality, have a way of speaking to our hearts, no matter how old we are. They remind us that goodness always triumphs over evil, that love can conquer all, and that there's always hope, even in the darkest of times. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, remember the lessons these stories have shared with us. And always remember, no matter how big or small, your actions matter, and they can make a difference in the world. Thank you for joining me on this journey through these wonderful tales. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, my dear friend, good night, and may your dreams be as magical as these stories.